Hello and welcome. My name is John Golden from SalesPOP Online Sales Magazine and Pipeliner CRM, and today I'm joined by Kevin Davis, who is the author of this book. You can see it here, Sales Management Guide to Greatness. Welcome, Kevin.
Thanks for having me, John.
Okay, Kevin, why don't you just start off, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into the interview, and also what made you or prompted you to write this book.
Well, for the last 20 years, we've been delivering a sales coaching and leadership workshop to groups of sales managers in a variety of different industries because, hey, I mean, as an original sales trainer from the early 1990s,
Right.
It was painfully obvious that there was one critical skill set that was limiting the effectiveness of our sales training to help sales teams be more successful, and that was the sales manager's ability to coach, drive, and reinforce it. And so that led to the development of the Sales Coaching and Leadership Workshop. It's a 2-day program. We, again, work both on-site with clients as well as open enrollment sessions. Have a fairly regular schedule. So ultimately, to provide a disciplined approach for sales managers to implement to become better coaches and leaders of the sales team.
Right.
So this is actually my third book. I wrote Getting Into Your Customer's Head was my first one, and then Slow Down, Sell Faster was the second book, and then the Sales Manager's Guide to Greatness was just kind of, hey, been delivering this workshop, and I really wanted to kind of reach a broader audience, and what better way to do that than write a book? And it's also an audiobook format.
There's some statistic out there, I've been quoting it for a long time, but I doubt it's changed, that the average tenure of a salesperson is 18 months, give or take, right?
Yeah.
Why is it that sales management is probably the hardest job in either sales or marketing or a lot of other disciplines in an organization, but it's one of the toughest jobs and the turnover rate is so high? Why is that?
Well, obviously, there's an incredible amount of stress.
Mm-hmm.
Also, they have the responsibility to translate the strategies determined by the senior executive level and bring them or operationalize them with customers through their salespeople. And I think one of the critical limiting steps is that many companies have this mindset that an A-player sales rep will automatically make for an A-player sales manager, even though the two jobs are completely different. So that's also part of the problem is they're much better salespeople than they are sales managers. And that, I mean, one question I ask a lot of sales managers is, how many sales skill workshops have you been through in your career? And then, well, how many sales manager skill workshops have you been to in your career? And I mean, it's just not even close.
Right.
So the numbers are pretty scary in terms of the number of sales managers that are asked to do their job without being taught how to do their job.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So in the first part of your book, you talk about this concept of self-leadership, right? And I think for me, that's an interesting concept because particularly if somebody's like promoted into a sales management job, right? They think their first priority is to lead their people, right? So talk to me a little bit about this concept of self-leadership.
Well, what we're trying to do is first and foremost to help sales managers recognize that what got them here won't get them there.
Right. Yeah.
And by that, I mean the skills that made them great salespeople can actually, in some respects, inhibit their effectiveness as sales managers. And so by building their awareness about these, I mean, ultimately, your greatest strength as a salesperson, if you overuse that strength as a sales manager, it'll diminish your effectiveness. And so it's helping sales managers to recognize that you got to make this transition. You got to change how you think about what you're doing. I'll give you one example of when when I was started as a sales manager. I wasn't given any instruction.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided to become a manager based on emulating those things I saw in previous bosses that I liked and not emulating those things in bosses that I didn't like.
Mm-hmm.
And that became the way I went to market. And one of the things that had really bothered me about a previous boss was his micromanagement approach. So I knew that when I became a sales manager, I didn't want to be a micromanager. And
Right.
so I wasn't. And then 3 years after I'd been managing a sales team for 3 years, I did a survey. I brought an independent party in to survey my sales force and asked them, what do they think I'm doing right? What could I do differently? And what was interesting was they said, you're not involved enough in our coaching and development. So here I thought that I had made the adjustment based on not being a micromanager that if I was a salesperson, I would want. And yet the feedback from my team was, hey, Kevin, we really want your involvement. We want your coaching. We want you to engage us. So it was a huge learning experience that what I thought was the right thing to do. I'd been managing a team for 3 years,
Sure.
but that moment was the first day that I actually truly became a sales manager for my team. So
yeah, that's really interesting. But I guess the big takeaway there is that the sales team didn't necessarily want you to micromanage them. What they wanted you was to coach and mentor them on a more hands-on fashion, right? And that's something that you talk a lot about in the book, is about the concept of being a coach and and improving and motivating your team. So talk to me a little bit about that, because let's be honest, coaching does not come naturally to most people. Most people are not good coaches.
So, well, when you asked me to talk about it, I mean, would you like me to reflect on why people aren't good coaches so often?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it all boils down to a matter of priorities.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's just so much coming at a sales manager these days. I talked to one sales manager recently. She spends on average 2 hours every day handling email.
Right.
And if she was able, which when you do the math on that, it adds up to over 500 hours a year of her time working on a computer screen in a certain communicating, but not really having an impact on the sales effectiveness of her people. And if she was able to re-examine her priorities and make some changes in terms of how she handled that particular aspect of what she's doing, if she could just reduce that 500 hours by 1/3, she would regain almost 25 full days of proactive coaching time a year for her salespeople. And so part of the reason that sales managers are in many respects ineffective coaches is because they just don't make time to coach. They don't set it as the priority that it needs to be. They allow themselves to be reactive firefighters instead of proactive sales leaders that are driven based on their priorities. I mean, I encourage sales managers to ask themselves one fundamental question multiple times every day. And that is, what is the impact on my sales team of what I'm about to do?
Right. Yeah.
And what happens is, you can have great leadership skills, but if you're not doing important tasks that actually move the needle in terms of the skill and the will of your people, well, then you're playing defense.
Yeah.
And that's not how you score usually.
No, exactly. And I think the point there, and then there's another, there's a friend of mine, colleague, who always says, that makes this point, is that if the coaching, if you set up regular coaching sessions with your salespeople, your sales teams or whatever, if that is the one appointment that it always gets moved or is the lowest priority, or if something comes up, it's like, oh, I'm going to cancel the coaching session, we'll do it next week. Number one, you're sending the message that it's not important to your team, and you're obviously, it's not important enough to you. So I like what you say about priority, because it's like, if you firefight, I mean, you can help take care of that issue. But if you coach and mentor, and you could get maybe a 2% improvement out of all of your salespeople, what does that translate to into revenue?
Well, revenue and retention, motivation and morale. And then that means less time you spend interviewing.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a vicious cycle. when you aren't involved in this. But ultimately, every sales manager would, I'm sure, agree with the fact that he or she is the most skilled salesperson on their team, or certainly as skillful as any individual on their team. That's the potential. So why wouldn't we not want to help every single person on our team become as masterful at selling as we are? Yeah. And, you know, sales managers at one point in their career were focused on the mastery of selling. Yeah. And I'm saying, let's shift that transition and let's become masters at sales management leadership. And when you set that as a priority, you know, great things can happen for you and your team.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about, in your book, about elements of excellence. So explain what you mean by elements of excellence.
So elements of excellence is I often ask companies, I said, well, do you have standards of performance for your salespeople? And in many respects, they always say yes. Tell me about those standards. Well, you have to sell X amount. And if you don't, over 2 quarters in a row, for example, you're gone. Right. That's a minimum standard. Yes. It's not a very hopeful message for the team. I mean, I understand why companies need to have it, okay, for performance management. I get that. But I would encourage sales managers to implement elements of excellence. In other words, what does your best salesperson do differently? What are the skills and what are the behaviors, the attitudes of those 1 or 2 people on your team that seem to sell 80% of the business, right? The 80-20 rule.
Right, sure.
And then define very clearly what they do differently. And those are your elements of excellence. And now share those elements with everybody on your team so that they can aspire to become great as well. And you're setting a higher bar. You're focusing everybody on the input side of the sales performance equation. You know, we get so focused on results that we forget about all the skills, behaviors, and activities that create the results. And that's a mistake.
And do you think, and it's interesting that maybe this is something that a sales manager should take on in terms of even identifying those elements of excellence, because there is, you often find with the best salespeople is that sometimes they don't even know what makes them good. We used to have this at Husway, we used to call this, you know, unconsciously competent, right? You know, you're really good, but if you said, okay, if I said, hey, Kevin, what makes you really good as a salesperson? You'd be like, I'm not sure. So it often takes a third party like the sales manager to say, here's what Kevin does differently to everybody else, or here's the things that he does. So I really like that idea of looking at your top salespeople and the sales manager really trying to show to the other salespeople what they do that makes them excellent.
Yeah, and we're trying to really raise the awareness that it's not just sales skills that matter. I did a webinar with 150 sales managers on it a few months ago. And one of the poll questions that I had for everybody was, what percentage of the sales performance problems that you face have attitude as a causal factor of the sales performance problem? And it was 50%. On average. I mean, some people was 25, others were 75. Sure. I mean, but the point is that on average, we ran it right across. I mean, it's half of the sales performance problems, according to 150 sales managers, have attitude as a component. And that's why in my book, Chapter 8 is really designed at the different caricatures of attitudinal problems, right? You've got the former A player who has since tanked. You've got and is now a C player. How do you handle that situation? Then you've got your prima donna, the one who's killing it on the numbers, but engaging in behaviors that are detrimental to the team. These are 2 entirely different attitudinal problems. Then you have a new hire that's not really developing the confidence that they need in order to be successful. So 3 different attitudinal problems. How do you deal with those in a clear and specific way, in such a way that they actually turn around and get on the right path? And that's the key, because the way many sales managers, we have this very blunt, we're kind of truth seers, right? And we just say, what's up with you? And here's what I see.
Yeah.
And that's not the best way to open this conversation, because
Mm-hmm.
people with bad attitudes don't see their own bad attitudes.
Yeah.
So when we come in there and hit them on it, it's like, wow, that's out of left field, and it immediately polarizes the conversation,
For sure.
causes friction. In other words, you can have a conversation with a sales rep that has a bad attitude, and it's worse after the conversation than before.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to prevent with the specific techniques in that chapter.
Yeah, I love that, because for me, throughout my career, the one thing, and I always say this to people who are going into management positions or leadership positions, is that self-awareness is one of the
Yeah.
biggest, it's one of the best traits you can have yourself, but it's one of the things that's going to cause you the greatest challenges, number one, if you don't have it, but also you're going to discover a lot of people who don't have it. And to your point, there's this rule of communication, is that people believe conclusions they reach by themselves over anything you're ever going to tell them. So that's why I like this chapter a lot, because part of what you're needing to do is lead somebody to a place where they can draw the conclusion themselves that, yeah, I do have a sucky attitude, or this is holding me back. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a great point. And there's kind of an ancillary tributary to that same thought. And when I was researching the book and to try to make it better, one of the principles in the field of psychology that I came across on is called the self-serving bias.
Mm.
This is a tendency for people to accept responsibility for their successes and blame others for their failures. So a sales manager sees it when a sales rep who has a great month says, well, that's because I have a great work ethic and terrific selling skills. But when that same sales rep has a lousy month, they blame marketing for lousy leads.
Yeah.
And so that's the self-serving bias. And the key point that sales managers need to understand about that is that salespeople oftentimes won't come to their manager and ask for coaching because they think they're better than they are. And which means they're making mistakes that are costing your company business, and they don't even know about it.
Right.
But they almost wear it as a badge of courage that I don't want to come talk to you, boss, because I know how busy you are, and I don't want to ask for your coaching because, well, I just don't. I'm really good. And again, confidence is great. It's what enables us to get through life dealing with difficulties. I get that.
Yeah.
But the alternative for sales managers is to be a proactive sales coach. You've got to take coaching to your people. The people who are the most needy of you are probably not the salespeople you need to be spending the bulk of your time with.
Sure. No, I totally agree. And it's an interesting thing, because what you just say there is about people coming and looking for coaching. But then if they look, a lot of people follow sports, obviously, and you look at the top players in the world in any field, right? They don't dispense with their coach when they get to the top. What do? They normally hire better ones, or they work harder with them, right? They don't suddenly go, well, I'm the best now. I'm the best golfer in the world, or I'm the best basketball player. I don't need to turn up for coaching anymore. I'll just practice in my backyard on my own. Yeah. And yet we do, as you say, we'll do it to ourselves, where we'll go, I'm good. I don't need any help. So I agree with that. So let me talk. The last section of your book is about taking action, and I think this is something that I just want to focus in on for a couple of minutes, because practical, taking action and doing stuff and being proactive and being practical in the outcomes. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, well, again, there's a hyper focus, and it's necessary, I guess, on results. But no two sales managers have an identical sales team. Every sales manager has unique challenges that he or she deals with. And my question is, what's your plan for dealing with it?
Right.
I mean, just set a goal. It's maybe a 12-month goal. I mean, one of the outcomes that many sales managers, we encourage sales managers to do, is a very quick exercise where they grade each of their salespeople individually on a scale of 1 to 5.
Right.
Their skill and their will.
Ah.
And then they break that down. They make a grade point average for each of those 2 attributes on their team. And then I ask them, well, so whose report card is this? And then it dawns on them that it's a report card on their sales leadership. That if they've got a C- sales rep with a lousy attitude and lousy skills, that's their fault.
Yeah.
What are you going to do about it? That is a what? So what if you set a goal to improve the skill and the will of your sales team by 20% between now and the end of the calendar year? Now, once you set that goal, and again, it's subjective. You're
Sure.
grading your people, but you see them all the time. So go ahead and do it. And then what are you going to do now? Well, maybe you need more skills. That would be one possibility. Maybe you need to spend more time with them. Maybe you need to get involved in certain opportunities sooner. Maybe you need to be BCC'd on all the memos of understanding. I mean, there's a variety of different things that you can do as a sales leader and strategies to implement. But it boils down to, why aren't all of your salespeople a 5-5?
Yeah.
What's the reason? And that reason is an opportunity for your sales leadership. Implement a plan, recognize the problem, implement a plan, and then drive it. And you'll make it happen. What it does also, John, is it gets you focused on it reconnects you to what's really important. Because at the end of the year, your company is going to grade your performance as a sales manager based on results and the success of your team.
Yeah.
And if your team is not healthy because they're not very skilled in certain respects, but you still make your number, well, you're just kicking the can down the road. And that's going to come back to haunt you in 2018.
Yeah, I love that because I do think that a lot of sales managers, they think, their plan for a salesperson for the year is the quota, right? That's it. There's nothing else, like no developmental plan or whatever. It's just the quota.
Right.
So I really like that idea. So, okay, well, listen, this has been a great conversation. Again, I want to highly recommend this book. You can see it here on screen, Sales Manager Guide to Greatness, Kevin Davis. So, Kevin, tell everybody how they can contact you or learn more about what you do.
So you can follow me on Twitter at Kevin F. Davis. Middle initial F as in Frank. And my company is called Top Line Leadership. And, as I said, we offer sales and sales manager development programs and services around that to really help both salespeople and sales managers make the changes that they need in order to increase their effectiveness and impact either with customers or with their sales teams.
Great. Okay, again, this is John Golden, SalesPOP Online Sales Magazine and Pipeliner CRM. Thanks again, Kevin, for coming and talking to us about your book today. I would encourage everybody to check it out. Go to Amazon. As you mentioned earlier, it's an audiobook as well for those of you who like to listen on planes or in cars. But I really would encourage you because I'm a firm believer that the sales manager is the greatest revenue multiplier in your organization, because if you've got a good sales manager, he's going to bring out the best in your teams.
Great, John.
Thank you.
Thank you.